The microphone screeched as my mother-in-law ripped my veil off in front of 200 guests. The hairpin hit the marble floor, and that sharp clink killed the music, the laughter, and even the hum of the cameras. I was 3 months pregnant. My belly barely lifted the fabric of my dress, but my hand was already covering the sonogram hidden inside my bridal bouquet. Rebecca Sterling pointed at my stomach and announced that some neighborhood charity volunteer was not going to trap her son with a convenient baby. Chloe, her daughter, laughed in the front row, and Valerie Vance, the family attorney, slapped a legal contract over my ultrasound like my child was a bad debt. Mason, my fiancé, stood frozen by the altar, while his mother, his sister, and his lawyer tore me to pieces in front of New York's elite. They expected me to cry, to sign the papers, and to beg forgiveness for daring to be pregnant by Althea man. But I just smiled slowly, pulled the sonogram out of my bouquet, and looked toward the back row, where my father was sitting in absolute silence. 30 seconds later, Arthur Harrington stood up, and my mother-in-law discovered 2 things. First, she had just humiliated the daughter of the man who owned the entire historic estate. Second, the last name she had just called trash could wipe out the Sterling family fortune before the ceremony even ended. If this story hooks you from the first hit, stick around to hear how it all ended. My name is Natalie Harrington. This is the story of how my wedding turned into the day a wealthy American family discovered their biggest debt. It wasn't to a Wall Street bank, it was to the pregnant woman they tried to erase. The private chapel on the Hudson Valley estate smelled of white roses, hot wax, and expensive perfume. The stained glass threw patches of colored light across the center aisle. In the back, the string quartet had stopped playing because no one knew if this was still a wedding or a social execution. I remained standing at the altar. I could feel the cold air on the back of my neck, right where Rebecca had ripped my veil off. A piece of the delicate tulle was trapped under her beige designer heel. She didn't even bother to lift her foot. Mason stared at the veil on the floor like he couldn't process how it got there. That was the first real wound of the morning. Not his mother's insult. Not Valerie's smirk. The wound was seeing the man who claimed to love me staring at the wreckage without moving a muscle. Rebecca Sterling didn't look like a woman out of control. That was the worst part. Her blowout was flawless, her pearls were perfectly aligned, and her voice dripped like honey through the chapel's sound system. "Dear guests," she said, "I apologize for interrupting this moment, but a mother has the right to protect their son. Especially from a woman who clawed her way into this family with a sob story, a rented dress, and a highly convenient pregnancy." A heavy murmur rippled through the pews. Mason's sister, Chloe, let out a short laugh. She was in the front row wearing a gold silk gown, phone already in hand. She wasn't recording yet, but she had her thumb hovering over the button. I saw her lean over to a cousin and whisper something that made them both stare at my bouquet. Valerie, the lawyer, seized the silence. She wasn't wearing a guest's dress. She wore a sharp, tailored white suit, stiletto heels, and carried a black leather portfolio. She had been the Sterling's trusted attorney for 3 years. She was also the woman who always stood just a little too close to Mason whenever I walked into a room. She was never his mistress, I found that out later, but Valerie desperately wanted to be. Sometimes, a woman who covets someone else's place can be more dangerous than a mistress. She still thinks she's fighting for a prize she deserves. That day, she wasn't acting as a guest. She was acting as a corporate executioner. To understand why Valerie had a prenup ready at my wedding, we have to go back 10 months. I met Mason at a community food bank in the Bronx. He didn't go there out of the goodness of his heart. He went because Sterling Enterprises had promised to donate Thanksgiving meals as part of a PR stunt. His whole team was obsessing over the lighting, the corporate logos, and finding the right angle so the food crates looked massive for Instagram. Mason was the only one who took off his suit jacket and actually carried tables. That afternoon smelled of bleached floors, old coffee, and canned soup. I was wearing a plain t-shirt, my hair tied up, and had flour on my hands from packing bread. He didn't ask me what prep school I went to or who my family was, he just asked where the crates of milk needed to go. The question was so remarkably normal that it made me smile. For weeks, he came back. Without the cameras, at first, I thought it was white-collar guilt, then I realized it was curiosity. Eventually, it turned into genuine affection. Mason fell for Natalie, the volunteer who organized shifts, talked to exhausted single mothers, and brought used toys to kids who never expected new ones. He didn't meet Natalie Harrington, daughter of Arthur Harrington, the founder of Harrington Hospitality, one of the most discreet, privately held empires of luxury hotels, private clinics, and real estate in the country. I didn't hide my identity out of shame. I hid it out of exhaustion. I had grown up watching people's voices change an octave the second they heard my last name. Men became too attentive, women became too careful, and families became overly generous. Calculated kindness smells a lot like cheap cologne. At first, it's pleasant, but soon it just gives you a headache. My dad knew this. When I told him I was dating Mason, he didn't ask what his family's net worth was. He asked if Mason could sit with me at a wobbly table in a diner without feeling degraded. I told him yes, and for a while, it was the truth. Mason came to my tiny Brooklyn apartment, ate takeout noodles from mismatched bowls, and laughed when my neighbor blasted hip-hop through the thin walls. He said with me, he could finally breathe. He proposed on a Tuesday night. No hidden photographers, no string quartet, no obnoxious diamond. Just a delicate ring and a sentence that, at the time, I thought was everything. He wanted a real life with me. I said yes. 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Mason cried when he saw the positive test. It wasn't a dramatic sob, just a small, overwhelmed tremor in his eyes. He held me carefully, like my body had turned to glass. I thought that love would be enough to face his family. I was dead wrong. My first visit to the Sterling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a brutally long dinner in a dining room with way too many mirrors. Rebecca looked me up and down, from my shoes to my hair, like she was scanning for a hidden discount tag. When she asked if I actually worked at a soup kitchen, I told her I worked in community outreach. Chloe smirked over her crystal wine glass and said, "Well, someone has to do the dirty work." The table chuckled that polite, country club law that doesn't stain the silverware but definitely leaves a scar. Mason squeezed my hand under the table. That comforted me then. I know now that squeezing a hand in secret is not the same as defending someone out loud. Rebecca started with small questions that smelled like poison served in crystal. How did I pay rent? Who was paying for my wedding dress? Did my family even have a venue nice enough to host important people? Was my pregnancy planned, or just highly convenient? Mason asked her to stop. She didn't. Valerie sat at the far end of the table. She wasn't family, but Rebecca treated her like she had a permanent seat at the Sterling dynasty. That night, Valerie just watched me with calm, predatory eyes. She didn't attack yet, she was just studying where it would hurt most. Then came the dress fitting. Rebecca insisted on taking me to a hyper-exclusive bridal boutique on Fifth Avenue. She claimed she wanted to help. Chloe showed up drinking champagne. Valerie showed up with a leather binder because, according to her, it was a good time to discuss preventative wealth management. I tried on a simple, flowing A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves. I loved it because it didn't press against my stomach. At 3 months, you couldn't really tell I was pregnant, but my body felt different. The smell of the boutique, a mix of raw silk and strong room spray, made me nauseous. Chloe looked at me in the mirror and said the cut made me look wide. Rebecca rubbed the fabric between her fingers, as if my poverty might be contagious, and suggested that something a little less white might be more honest. Valerie didn't laugh, she did something worse. She pulled out a pen, jotted on note, and stated that, for the sake of the prenuptial agreement, it needed to be clear that the dress was not purchased with Sterling family assets. The seamstress literally froze with a mouthful of pins. I looked at my reflection. I had pins near my waist, a hand on my belly, and 3 women deciding how much right I had to look like a bride. I didn't cry. I bought the dress with my own black card and walked out into the Manhattan rain. Mason called me that night to apologize for his mother. When I asked about Valerie, he defended her with a phrase that seemed clumsy then, but now just feels cowardly. He said, "She's the family lawyer, Nat. She's intense, but she's just trying to protect the family." Protect them from me, I thought, but I didn't say it. The next humiliation was the engagement party. I brought a gift made by the women at the community center, a beautifully hand-quilted throw blanket. Several mothers had worked on it for weeks. It was gorgeous. Not expensive, but rich with heart. Rebecca opened the box in front of everyone and dragged out the word homemade until it sounded like a slur. Chloe picked up a corner and asked if it was machine washable or if it would just fall apart in the laundry. Someone snickered. Mason frowned, but Valerie stepped in with her slick, professional smile and said, "It's a very authentic gesture. Exactly what we'd expect from you." The word authentic sounded exactly like poor. That same night, Valerie planted the first massive lie. She claimed a friend of hers had overheard me talking at the food bank. According to this imaginary friend, I had bragged that marrying Mason would secure a massive trust fund for my baby. I stood perfectly still, but Mason looked at me with a flash of doubt that shattered my chest. I told him it was a lie. Valerie lowered her voice, feigning sympathy. "Maybe you said it without realizing how it sounded," she suggested. Rebecca seized the moment like she'd been waiting for a cue and dropped the word prenup again. From that day on, the word prenup stalked me like a shadow. Strange things started happening. My Brooklyn landlord told me a private investigator had been asking if I lived alone. At the food bank, someone filed an anonymous tip claiming I was stealing donation money to buy wedding shoes. It was a complete fabrication, but I spent 2 days pulling receipts and ledgers to clear my name. Then, a fake screenshot surfaced. It looked like a text from me to a friend, saying the baby was my golden ticket. The grammar was atrocious, like someone trying to mimic poor people without ever actually talking to one. Mason showed it to me, his jaw tight, and asked if it was real. His doubt hurt more than the forgery. I didn't answer the question. I just said, "If you have to ask me that, we have a much bigger problem than a fake text." Mason stayed with me that night. He begged for forgiveness. He said he trusted me. He said his mother was just paranoid and Valerie saw risks everywhere because she was paid to. I wanted to believe him, but I started saving everything. Screenshots, emails, unknown caller IDs, dates, names. Not because I wanted to destroy anyone, but because a pregnant woman learns quickly that memory isn't enough when rich people can afford to buy better versions of the truth. The night before the wedding, Rebecca showed up at my apartment. Valerie was right beside her, holding a thick manila envelope. Inside were stacks of $100 bills, a lot of them. Rebecca dropped it on my kitchen counter, right next to a mug of ginger tea I'd made for my morning sickness. She ordered me to walk away before the ceremony. "Tell him you got cold feet. Mason will hurt for a while, but he'll recover." Valerie chimed in, adding that if I insisted on going through with the wedding, they were prepared to leak the evidence of my financial extortion to the press. I looked at the cash. It smelled like fresh ink, banks, and pure insult. Then I looked at Rebecca and asked what would happen to my child. She didn't even blink. A child can live perfectly well without being used as a social ladder. I took a mental photograph of that exact sentence. I didn't touch the money. I didn't scream. I just opened my front door and told them I'd see them at the altar. Valerie looked at me with sheer disgust before warning me not to cry later when they destroyed me. When they left, I called my dad. I didn't ask him to rescue me. I told him everything and asked for something different. I wanted him to come to the wedding, just as my dad. If I decided to blow the whole thing up, I needed him there to witness it. My dad was quiet for a few seconds, then said he would be wherever his daughter needed him, but the decision had to be mine. That is why he was sitting in the back row that morning. Not as a savior, but as a witness. And now, it had all come to a head at the altar. My veil was pinned under Rebecca's Prada heel. The contract was sitting right on top of my baby's sonogram. Valerie placed her leather binder on the altar's wooden lectern and pulled out a document. With a crisp, courtroom voice, she said, "If your intentions are pure, you will have no problem signing this before we proceed." Mason took a step toward her, muttering, "Valerie, this isn't in the program." But Rebecca cut him off with a glare. "Don't be naive. Mason. This is exactly why you need us." My grip tightened on my bouquet. Hidden among the white peonies was my ultrasound from just last week. A tiny, gray, fuzzy image that meant nothing to a stranger. To me, it was a promise. My pregnancy wasn't obvious yet. 3 months just brings weird exhaustion, nausea when you smell coffee, and a subconscious habit of resting your hand on your stomach. That's why they picked this exact moment. They could weaponize my pregnancy before my body made it undeniable. Valerie held out a gold pen. "This agreement protects Mason Sterling from any unwarranted financial claims," she announced loudly. "It also ensures that a recent pregnancy cannot be leveraged to extort the Sterling family." The phrase "recent pregnancy" shot out of her mouth like an indictment. Rebecca raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. 3 months, Natalie. Right after Mason announced his promotion at the firm. What a heartwarming coincidence. Chloe laughed again. This time, a few people in the crowd joined in. Mason turned to look at me. I saw the doubt creeping back into his eyes. It wasn't battered, it was worse. It was a hairline fracture in his trust, chipped away by weeks of rumors, whispers, and fake documents I hadn't even seen yet. I didn't break eye contact. Valerie flipped to the next page. "Miss Harrington must acknowledge she has no right to pre-existing Sterling family assets. She must also agree that she cannot claim an increase in alimony due to her pregnancy. Any matters concerning the minor will be subject to legal review by the Sterling family's counsel." The minor. The minor. The minor. That's what she called my child before I had even spoken my vows. Rebecca snatched the paper and shoved it toward me. She pushed it directly into my bouquet. The sharp corner of the thick legal paper crushed the flowers and exposed the hidden sonogram. Valerie's eyes lit up. "Oh, perfect," she said. "We can attach that as Exhibit A. Proof of current condition." A guest in the third row let out a loud, uncomfortable gasp. The quartet was dead silent. The only sounds were the rustle of expensive silk, the mechanical click of camera shutters, and my own steady breathing. I pulled the ultrasound out of the crushed flowers and placed it gently on top of the contract. I wasn't shaking, and that confused Rebecca. She snapped, "Are you going to sign it or not?" I looked at her. "No. I'm going to let your lawyer read the whole thing out loud." The whispering in the crowd shifted tone. Valerie clenched her jaw. "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is," I fired back, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "If you want my child to start his life as a legal liability, I want everyone in this room to hear exactly how much a baby costs you." Mason stared at me like I was a stranger. The Natalie who cried quietly during sad movies was gone. The Natalie at the altar had a sonogram in her hand and 200 hostages in pews. Valerie began to read. Her voice was clinical, professional, and absolutely vile. She read that I waived all rights to any financial support beyond what the family strictly deemed necessary. She read that my pregnancy could not be used as grounds to void the prenup. She read that in the event of a dispute, the Sterlings would solely select the arbitrators, the lawyers, and the jurisdiction. Every single clause was just an elegant, legally binding way of saying my child would need their permission to exist. Rebecca stepped closer to me, lowering her voice, though the lapel mic on Mason still picked up the poison. "Sign it, little girl," she hissed. "Your father should be on his knees, thanking God that people like us are taking on a bastard like that." That was when a wooden pew creaked in the back row. The sound was faint, just heavy oak, scraping against stone, but it rang through my chest like a war bell. My father stood up. Arthur Harrington didn't look like the ruthless titan you see in Forbes or Wall Street Journal profiles. Today, he wore a simple, unflashy navy suit and a plain tee. He wore the exact same calm expression he used when he taught me, as a little girl, never to respond to every barking dog. He had arrived early, sat in the back, and asked the staff not to make a fuss. He kept quiet because it was me wedding day, and because he never wanted his empire to overshadow my life choices. But this wasn't just my wedding anymore. This was an auction block where they were putting a price tag on his grandson. My father walked down the center aisle. Nobody recognized him at first. Some of the Greenwich elite looked at him the way you look at a confused, poor relative who wanders too close to the VIP section. Rebecca scowled, treating him exactly like an annoying peasant. "Sir, this is a private matter between my family and my son's fiancée. Sit down." My father stopped at the edge of the front row. "Before my daughter signs anything, I'd like to hear exactly how much my grandson is worth to the Sterling family." The chapel went so dead quiet I actually heard someone snap a clutch purse shut. Valerie put on her best condescending, fake patient smile. "Sir, legally speaking, you have no standing here. This doesn't concern you." My dad didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her and said, "If that document affects my pregnant daughter and my grandson, counselor, it concerns me more than you could possibly fathom." Rebecca let out a dry, rattling laugh. "With all due respect," she sneered. "If you could have provided her with a better life, she wouldn't be up here, trying to extort her way into a family so far above her station." That sentence was the final nail Rebecca hammered into her own coffin. My father looked at her. Not with rage, but with a terrifying, absolute calm that instantly wiped the smirk off Rebecca's face. Mason looked down at the floor. Valerie tried to seize control again. "Sir, please take your seat. We are offering very generous conditions for Natalie." My dad looked at the contract sitting on top of my sonogram and repeated one word. "Generous." The word dropped so heavily that Chloe actually stopped texting in the front row. At that exact second, the estate manager walked in through a side door. He was pale, pressing an earpiece into his ear, and walked straight past the sterling stone my father. "Sir," he whispered, "do you want me to shut the event down?" The entire chapel heard the manager call him sir, not like a guest, but like the owner. A wave of frantic whispers exploded across the pews. "Did he say? Wait, is that Harrington? Harrington Group. Oh my God." Chloe's phone slowly slid out of her hand and fell into her lap. Rebecca stared at the manager. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. The manager swallowed hard before speaking directly into the microphone. "Ma'am, this estate is owned by Harrington Hospitality Group." The word owned bounced off the stained glass. All the color drained out of Valerie's lips. My father reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a heavy, matte black business card, and set it on the lectern next to the prenup. Arthur Harrington, founder and CEO, Harrington Group. Natalie's father. He didn't need to say another word. The silence did the heavy lifting. Mason snapped his head up. I watched his brain frantically reassemble the last 10 months. My charity work, my off-the-rack clothes, my walk-up apartment, the times I politely declined his offers to buy me expensive jewelry or first-class tickets. The dinners where his mother asked me if I knew which fork to use for salad. I never lied to him about who I was, I just never handed him my last Namia's an admission ticket. Rebecca stumbled backward. Her voice cracked for the first time. You're that Harrington?" My dad corrected her without raising his tone. "I am the father of the woman you just called trash, in front of 200 people. Valerie slammed her leather binder shut way too fast. She was no longer a shark in a courtroom, she was a woman trying to hide a bloody knife after already stabbing someone on camera. I placed my hand firmly on my stomach and looked at Valerie. "Leave the folder open." She glared at me with pure venom. I held her gaze and spoke into the mic. I wanted on the record that this contract was presented under duress, during my wedding ceremony, directly on top of my child's ultrasound. My dad turned slightly to the man sitting in the pew to his right. It was Thomas Wright, the chief legal officer for Harrington Group. He had come as a guest, not as an attack dog, but as a family friend who just wanted to drink champagne and celebrate my happiness. Thomas stood up, unbuttoned his jacket, and pulled out a notepad. Noted and witnessed, he said loudly. Rebecca grabbed her pearl necklace like she was choking. This is just a massive misunderstanding, she stammered to the crowd. The only misunderstanding, I replied, was you mistaking my silence for shame. Mason finally took a step toward me. Nat. I swear to God, I didn't know they were going to do this. I looked at him, completely hollowed out. But you knew they were building a case against me. And you doubted me. That hit him harder than a punch to the jaw. Valerie took a deep breath, trying to salvage her career. Mason, do not let them manipulate you. She lied to you. She hid her identity. She defrauded this entire family. My dad didn't defend me. And I didn't hide behind him. I picked up the sonogram. I hid my bank account, Valerie. Not my child. You two tried to erase both. The murmuring in the crowd turned hostile. Thomas, my dad's lawyer, stepped up to the altar and asked Valerie for permission to review the document. Valerie aggressively pulled it back, claiming attorney-client privilege. The estate manager stepped between them. Miss Vance, this event is being hosted under a Harrington Group venue contract. If there is evidence of legal coercion occurring on our property, we are required by corporate policy to secure the scene. The word coercion made half the guests frantically shove their phones into their pockets. Chloe was the first to panic. I saw her frantically swiping at her screen, trying to delete something. My father saw her, too. Marcus, my dad said to the manager. Instruct the AV team to lock down and preserve all video and audio recordings from the chaplain the main house immediately. Rebecca's eyes bulged. You can't do that. That is illegal. My dad looked at her and delivered the most devastating line of the day. It's my house, Rebecca. For the first time in her life, Rebecca Sterling had absolutely nothing to say. Valerie tried to maintain her icy corporate posture, but her hand visibly shook as she handed the contract over to Thomas. Thomas read it in silence. With every page he flipped, his face turned harder. Finally, he looked up and summarized it for the crowd without hiding behind legal jargon. This isn't a prenuptial agreement, Thomas announced. This is a financial hostage document designed to trap a pregnant woman under public duress. It's a standard preventative measure, Valerie snapped. Thomas looked at the sonogram on the lectern. No, counselor, it's an ambush. A man in the back row muttered a loud, colorful curse word directed at the Sterlings. Rebecca whipped her head around, furious, but she had entirely lost control of the room. My father reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He didn't unfold it right away. He just looked at Mason. 3 weeks ago, my father said calmly, Sterling Enterprises submitted an urgent request to Harrington Group for a $50 million bridge loan to save your Palm Beach luxury condo development from defaulting. Mason's eyes widened in horror. Rebecca went chalk white. And 2 weeks ago, my father continued, Rebecca Sterling personally called my hospitality division to demand a friends and family discount to host this wedding on my property. The manager stared at his shoes. 10 minutes ago, that exact same woman had called his daughter a gold-digging peasant on that very property. The silence was deafening. Mason's aunt dropped a champagne flute in the front row. The crystal didn't shatter, but the loud clack against the stone floor made everyone jump. My father placed the paper on the lectern next to his business card. As of this exact moment, the review of the Palm Beach financing is permanently denied. Rebecca covered her mouth with both hands. Mason spun around to face his mother. What loan? What the hell is he talking about? It was the exact moment Mason realized his family had been playing him, too. Valerie tried to step in, using my dad's first name. Arthur, please, let's discuss this in private. My dad didn't let her finish. It's Mr. Harrington to you. The correction was so softly spoken, but Valerie physically recoiled like she'd been slapped. Thomas pulled a tablet from his briefcase and handed it to the AV tech. A second later, the two massive flat screens on either side of the altar, the ones meant to play our romantic wedding slideshow, lit up. My chest tightened. They were screenshots of text messages. Messages Valerie had sent to Rebecca. On massive, 80-inch displays, the whole chapel read Valerie calling me the charity case. They read her texting that a woman who handed out canned goods wouldn't have the money to fight a bulletproof contract. They read Valerie advising Rebecca that my pregnancy was my only leverage. They read Valerie promising that if Mason hesitated, she would manufacture a paper trail showing she's just a gold digger. Mason read the screens. All the blood rushed out of his face. Valerie whispered his name. He didn't even look at her. Thomas clicked to the next slide. It was an email. Valerie had sent Rebecca a drafted, fake witness statement. The email outlined a plan to pay off a fake employee at the Bronx Food Bank to sign an affidavit claiming I had bragged about securing the sterling fortune by getting knocked up. The employee didn't text. Valerie had fabricated a legal hit job on her own firm's letterhead. Rebecca lunged toward the lectern, hysterical. "Turn that off, stop this right now." I held up my hand. "No." My voice boomed through the mic, louder and harsher than I knew I was capable of. "You didn't stop when you ripped my veil off. You didn't stop when you put a contract over my baby's face. You don't get to stop this just because it's finally your turn to listen." Mason stared at me, his eyes were red, but no tears fell. He didn't deserve my comfort anyway. Valerie finally snapped. The polished corporate lawyer vanished, and the bitter, jealous woman underneath clawed her way out. "You were a nobody," she screamed at me. "You were nothing before he looked at you." There it was. The ugly, unvarnished truth. It wasn't about protecting family assets. It wasn't about legal ethics. It was pure envy, entitlement, and the rotten belief that a man is a prize you win by destroying another woman. I walked over to the altar and picked up my veil from the floor. The delicate white tulle had a dirty, perfect imprint of Rebecca's heel on it. I laid the veil neatly on the lectern next to the sonogram and the prenup. "Thomas," I said, "make sure you log the heel print into evidence, too." My mother-in-law physically assaulted me at the altar while her attorney attempted to force a signature under public duress. Rebecca stepped toward me, her hands shaking. For the first time, she used the word please. "Natalie, please. We can handle this privately." "In a boardroom." "You're too late." "Rebecca." Chloe stood up, her face pale, and whispered aggressively to her mother. "Mom, shut up. Everyone is recording." My dad looked at Rebecca and nodded. "Exactly." The priest, who had been standing frozen against the back wall the entire time, slowly closed his ceremonial book. The heavy thud of the leather cover was the symbolic death of the wedding. Mason walked up the steps toward me, but he stopped a few feet away. He didn't try to touch me. "I screwed up, Nat. I should have shut them down the second this started." "Yes. You should have." It was nice that he didn't make excuses, but it changed nothing. "My mom showed me things," Mason pleaded. "Valerie showed me fake text messages. I was confused. I didn't know what to believe." "You chose to doubt me," I said, my voice steady. "While they were building a guillotine for our child, you stood by and let them." Mason dropped his head. He knew I was right. Rebecca, realizing she was losing her son and her fortune in one swoop, fired her last, desperate bullet. "If you walk out those doors, Natalie, that child will never carry the Sterling name." I looked at her and felt a ferocious, overwhelming peace. My child doesn't need an SN that comes with a gag order. Rebecca opened her mouth, but this time, nobody had her back. The front rows were completely silent. Chloe slowly lowered her phone like it was radioactive. The cousin who had laughed earlier was now hiding her face behind a silk handkerchief. Valerie tried to storm over to the AV booth to yank the cables out, but Marcus, the estate manager, easily stepped in her path. He didn't even touch her. "Ma'am, the equipment is secured." Valerie's face turned purple. "I am the legal representative of Sterling Enterprises. Move! Marcus looked at her with glacial indifference. You are trespassing on Harrington property. Step back. That single sentence drained the last drop of fight out of Valerie Vance. Thomas instructed the tech team to export the audio files. Then, he pointed at the discreet security cameras mounted above the altar, down the center aisle, and at the grand mahogany doors. The little red lights were all blinking. Every camera had caught Rebecca stepping on my veil. Every microphone had recorded Valerie placing a legal trap over my baby's ultrasound. My father didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just spoke with the terrifying efficiency of a CEO executing a hostile takeover. Harrington Group is formally withdrawing all consideration for the Palm Beach Bridge loan. Furthermore, the Avenue discount is revoked. Every dollar spent on this event will be billed directly to Sterling Enterprises at full premium market rate. A man in Mason's groomsmen party knocked over a glass of water. It shattered loudly, pooling around his expensive Italian shoes, but nobody moved to clean it up. Rebecca stared at the puddle on the floor. Then she looked at my father, her arrogance totally broken. Arthur. Please. Not in front of all these people. My dad didn't blink. You did it in front of all these people, Rebecca. Mason turned to his mother. For the first time in his life, he didn't look like a son seeking approval. Does the Palm Beach project depend on his company? Rebecca couldn't even make eye contact. Mason whipped his head toward Valerie. Did you know about this? Valerie swallowed hard. Her silence was a louder confession than screaming it into the microphone. Suddenly, the whole master plan made sickening sense. They didn't just want to humiliate me. They wanted to force me to sign away my rights before my father had a chance to introduce himself. They wanted to financially silence a pregnant woman, completely unaware that they were doing it inside a building my family owned, in front of the man holding the leash to their dying company. I looked down and saw Chloe frantically typing on her phone again. Don't delete the group chat. Chloe, I warned loudly. Her hand froze in mid-air. Thomas walked over to her, flanked by two of my dad's corporate security guys in plain clothes. Please hand over the device, Miss Sterling. Evidence preservation. Chloe shook her head, terrified. She looked like a spoiled teenager caught shoplifting. It wasn't just a video, it was an iMessage group chat named The Charity Case. They had spent weeks sending sneaky photos of my dress, making vile jokes about my stomach, and drafting a literal script for the wedding day. One text from Chloe read, "Make sure she signs it before they cut the cake." Another from Valerie said, "If she cries, make sure the photographer gets it." Mason read the texts over Thomas's shoulder. His hands started to shake violently. "Is this what you've been doing behind my back?" he yelled at his mother. Rebecca reached out for his arm. "Mason, darling, we were only protecting your future." Mason violently jerked his arm away. "You didn't protect me. You destroyed everything." He didn't hit her, but Rebecca flinched like he had. Her eyes finally filled with frantic, terrified tears. Valerie took a step backward and accidentally bumped into the lectern. The leather binder fell to the marble floor, the pages of the prenup spilling out like dead wings. Thomas picked up the documents with the careful precision of a man collecting murder weapons. He looked right at Valerie. "We will be forwarding this entire file, along with the AV recordings, to the New York State Bar Association. Coercion, fraudulent misrepresentation, and conspiracy to extort a pregnant woman. Have a nice career, counselor." Valerie tried to force a laugh, but it came out as a wet gasp. That doesn't prove anything." "It proves enough to get you disbarred," Thomas replied cheerfully. The murmuring in the crowd changed again. It wasn't gossip anymore, it was social terror. The kind of cold sweat that sweeps through high society when they realize they just laughed at the wrong person. My father closed his eyes for a brief second, not out of pain, but out of pride. Mason took one last desperate step toward me. "Nat, please. I want to be a father." I looked at him, completely exhausted but utterly clear-headed. "Then start by being a man, Mason." not an obedient little boy. The sentence knocked the wind out of him. I reached for my left hand and slid the diamond engagement ring off my finger. I didn't throw it at him. I didn't make a cheap Lifetime movie scene. I gently placed it right on top of the prenup clause that tried to control my baby's life. Then, I placed the ultrasound picture on top of the ring. "I am not marrying you today," I said into the microphone. The clicking of the cameras sounded like dry rain. Rebecca whispered something I couldn't hear. Valerie pressed her lips together so hard they turned white. Mason just stood there, paralyzed, like every word I spoke was adding another brick to a wall he had helped build between us. I kept talking. "I'm not canceling this wedding because you found out I have money. I'm canceling it because I found out my son would be born into a lie covered in white flowers." Nobody clapped at first. They didn't need to. The total silence was better. Then, an older woman on my family's side of the aisle stood up. Then, another. Then, Brenda, the floor manager from the Bronx Food Bank. She had come wearing a simple navy blue dress from Macy's, and her eyes were shining with tears. She was the first one to walk out into the aisle. "Let's go home, baby," Brenda said warmly. The word home had never sounded so good. My father didn't grab my arm. He just waited at the end of the aisle for my decision. I picked up my sonogram, left the veil and the diamond sitting on top of their worthless contract, and walked down the center aisle. Mason didn't try to stop me. That was the only right thing he did all day. Outside, the New York afternoon sun was blinding against the stone steps. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and rain. I rested my hand on my stomach. It was still small. Nobody looking at me from across the lawn would know there was a life growing inside me. But I felt him, and that was enough. Behind me, the wedding was collapsing. Not with screaming matches, but with frantic phone calls to crisis PR teams, canceled credit cards, shattered reputations, and a family that had finally dropped its mask. 3 months later, I heard Mason's name again in the waiting room of a maternity clinic in Manhattan. He didn't come with a dozen roses, and he didn't come with lawyers. He showed up in a plain button-down shirt, dark circles under his eyes, and a manila folder tucked under his arm. I was 5.5 months along. My stomach was finally announcing what my hand had been protecting for months. Mason stopped a few feet away. He told me he had officially resigned from Sterling Enterprises. He had voluntarily handed over his copies of Valerie's emails to the Bar Association, and his mother was currently drowning in federal audits over the Palm Beach disaster. He didn't come to beg me to take him back. He just came to ask for permission to hear his son's heartbeat. If I allowed it, I didn't answer right away. The hallway smelled of sterile wipes and cheap waiting room coffee. From a room down the hall, I could hear the rapid, rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a fetal monitor. I thought about the chapel. I thought about the crushed veil, the contract, and the way Mason stood frozen when I needed him to move mountains for me. Then I thought about my son. A nurse opened the door and called my name. "Natalie Harrington?" I looked at Mason. I nodded toward the door, allowing him to stand in the hallway and listen. His eyes immediately filled with tears. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a small window of grace, exactly the size of a heartbeat. I walked into the exam room. My dad was sitting in the waiting area, my old ultrasound was safely tucked in my Prada bag, and a brand new certainty was anchored in my bones. My son wasn't going to be born into a corporate lie. And he wasn't going to be born into hatred, either. He was going to be born into a life where his mother knew how to look the devil in the eye and say no, even dressed in white. Even in front of 200 people. Even when the whole world expected her to bow her head. And that, more than any trust fund or family name, was the very first inheritance I could give him.